Hi, Linda Eastburn here. I'm glad you're watching the channel, and I would like to ask you to please subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, it's absolutely free. Just click that button, and it really helps us keep the channel going. My guest today is David Wilbanks. He's an author of at least one book, maybe more. Maybe we'll find out after he comes on the show. So I'm going to welcome David Wilbanks.
Okay.
So, welcome to the show, David.
Hello. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, it looks like you're out in the woods there. I know you're not, but it sure is a good picture behind you.
Well, that's very close. That's from about 200 yards behind my house. So
Yeah.
it is a virtual background, but it is virtually on my own property here. So,
Well, it looks very familiar. I grew up on a farm and we had a lot of wooded areas, and it looks a lot like us here in Missouri. So I'm
oh,
familiar with
yeah.
the woods.
Yeah. Very similar terrain.
Yeah. So I know you're a Bigfoot researcher. You've written some books. You've done some film work with different shows. But first of all, why don't you tell me exactly what got you interested in this whole subject to start with?
Well, from a very young age, I've always been interested in like mysterious type subjects. And of course, when I was a little kid, you had the show the mysterious monsters came out, and I was just glued to that. That was excellent. But besides that, back in the late 60s, my mother worked for a veterinarian named Dr. Lewis Stiles. And we would all, and he was at Holdenville at that time, but when I was still very young, he moved his family back down to Broken Bow, Oklahoma, which is in the southeast corner of the state. And he had quite an extensive library of different wildlife and such as that. And we would go down and visit them like quite often, really. But he had a book, the one Roger Patterson wrote, called "Do Abominable Snowmen of America Really Exist?" And I don't know if you're familiar with that book. I'm sure you are. But it's also illustrated, and Roger Patterson did the illustrations of that. And I was just enamored with that. It's fascinating. And then not long after that, um, Lewis showed me a newspaper article from McCurtain County of somebody that'd been out in the woods and claimed to have saw a Bigfoot. And of course, I'm like, oh my gosh, we got Bigfoot in Oklahoma. Of course, I thought they'd all had to be out in California or somewhere. But that was my introduction to it, and I've been interested in that all my life. And I put it this way when I'm talking. Uh, I love the outdoors and I love a good mystery. And to me, that is the neatest outdoor mystery we got left is that of the Bigfoot subject.
Well, it is, and a lot of people, I think, it keeps them going because the mystery is so fascinating. But so many people have had some kind of an experience, whether it be just a sound or whether it be a sighting. There's just a lot of people out there. I had no idea when I started doing these Bigfoot videos that there would be so many people with evidence and with some kind of a report that they'd actually seen something.
Mhm.
So you were interested. So where did that take you then? When did you first get out in the woods and actually start looking for Bigfoot?
Well, even when I was a teenager, and of course, I grew up in a small town, lived out in the country, and even from the time I was about 13 or so, me and friends, we would literally just especially during the summer when school was out, we'd say, "Hey, you want to go camping?" And we would just load our backpacks up with food and a sleeping bag and just head off into the woods. And wherever we found that was suitable to camp, we would just set up camp there. Now, that wasn't officially looking for Bigfoot, but it was always in my mind at that time. But in the mid to late 90s, I would say, is when I first started really looking into this and collecting accounts from people. And for a time, I wasn't a member of BFRO, but I was a contact here in Oklahoma for them, and I investigated a few sightings for them. Then I right about that same time started a website of my own called southernbigfoot.com, and I would collect, people would send me their reports, and if I felt like one was worth going to investigate, I would go and do on-site investigations on those as well. So
Mhm.
mid to late 90s, is when that really started.
What did you find on those? Did you find anything that was extremely credible and that had good evidence?
Yes. Well, of course, you've got eyewitness testimony. One of the early ones that I investigated on my own that I feel and still to this day feel is very credible is there were a couple of off-duty law enforcement officers up in northeast Oklahoma that had a face-to-face encounter with the Bigfoot in the river bottoms below Grand Lake, and these two guys, they're featured on the, well, we haven't got into that yet. I helped the Travel Channel make a documentary back in the 2001 is when we shot the documentary. It didn't air till 2003, but it was called Bigfootville. And the people I'm talking about right now, they were featured on it. One of them, the officer's name was Dan Belda, and he's since passed away. But him and his friend, who was one was an off-duty police officer, the other was a sheriff's deputy, and they were in these river bottoms, and they had been target practicing earlier in the night. If you'd seen where this is at in these bottoms, they're on one side. There's a pretty high ridge goes up. You know, it's pretty mountainous, and they were hearing something. And at the bottom of this mountain, there's a little berm there, which they were on one side is where they had their campfire set up, and they were hearing something on the other side of that berm, like in the leaves, and they thought it was an armadillo. So he said, so we went around it. We walked around that berm. We're going to shoot the armadillo. But what they were hearing was this Bigfoot was down on its belly and it was scooting up the side of that berm to look at them over the top of it. And that's what they were hearing in the leaves. And when they come around the corner, it stood up right in front of them. And I said, what did you do? And I'm not going to tell you exact words that they said because they're not real appropriate. But let's put it this way. He said, we screamed like girls and ran, you know. And I was there not long after that because they contacted me really quickly, sent me an email. And this is about a 3 hour drive from where I'm at. But they had left all their camping gear down there. And well, I think they sent a friend back to pick it up the next day. And when I went down there and met the one gentleman down there, the other guy wouldn't even go back. And this guy, Dan, at the time, he wouldn't stay till dark. So I stayed that first night myself down there. And when he saw nothing ate me or anything when I was down there, he and I went back down in that area several times after that. So to me, that was an extremely credible account just because of the fear and the nature. They didn't see it at a distance. They saw it face to face. So that was one of the earlier, very credible accounts that I investigated. There's several more, but that one does stand out. And I go further into that, and I write about it in my first book on the sightings and stuff. You can see it here. It's called, well, Comiskey Bigfoot Investigating the Oklahoma Sasquatch. I go into detail on that investigation and others. And also in state of Oklahoma, Bigfoot folklore, most people's heard of what's called the casino footage, in which the tribal casino out west of Oklahoma City, several miles, back in, this would have took place probably summer of 2000, I believe, to the best of my recollection. And I was a contact for the BFRO at the time. Wasn't a card carrying member, if there is such a thing, but I was a contact here in Oklahoma. And I got contacted by them and said, hey, you ought to check out this casino. There was a Sasquatch trying to get into a grease trap out there. I'm like, okay, a grease trap. Well, I was like, where is it? And when they told me where it was at, I'm like, that's kind of a lot of prairie out there. That's not your, stereotypical Bigfoot country, to put it that way. But then they told me, says, well, they've got it on video, they said, so surveillance video. So I said, well, I'll make the trip. And there's another gentleman in the state. He's from Tulsa. His name was Roger Roberts. I don't know if he's still active in it or not, but he actually was part of the BFRO and, sent me out there first. And I got out there to the casino, and it actually was close to the North Canadian River, which if you go back to about guess it's closer to 50 years ago now, they had the reports of Bigfoot along that area. This wasn't very far from that. And other than just prairie, there happened to be a large wooded area there with a lot of natural springs in it, which that's where the footprints coming across this field toward the back of the casino was coming from, was that area. So I met with people there, uh, called up Roger and said, I think this is a real deal. You should come up here. So him and a friend of his, I've got to remember this guy's name. I don't remember the other guy. He wasn't a Bigfoot investigator, but he was a friend of Roger's and he came along. They let us in I just call it the security room. We had to sign release papers and all that. And we were actually allowed to see the raw footage of that from that camera. Now, the grease trap, it looks just like a dumpster, okay? Just a green dumpster. But instead of just a big lid that raised up, this had a smaller lid on top of it that they lift up and put the grease in. So what we saw in the video was something starts coming across the parking lot behind this casino. And the first thing you see, it looks like a little light. Now, here's one place me and Roger interpreted that a little bit different. I interpreted it like the glare of the street lamps off the top of its head. Roger, he described it as eye shine. Either way, that's the first thing we noticed. And as it gets to the grease trap, there is a light pole over this grease trap, and it's not like real tall. It went up, its head didn't come quite to it, but it kind of come up and was over and down like this. And here's the grease trap. And it stepped into the light as it steps up to this, and it leans over and puts its hands on the top of this lid. And that's as much of it as we saw. But what we were able to do is we watched this over and over many times. And to describe the creature, and I seen a episode of Finding Bigfoot when they do it, where they do a reenactment of it. And the reenactment creatures they never look right. They're cartoonish and they're bulky and they shamble. This didn't move like that. It was tall and lanky. I've described it as like, imagine take an NBA player, the way they're built, cover them with hair. That's kind of what you had here. It wasn't like the, Patterson film where it's kind of a blocky, heavy built. This was very athletic built. And he just kind of glided into view and reached down to touch that. Couldn't tell what color it was because, it's surveillance video, not really color, just that kind of greenish gray look from like night filming. But what we were able to do was ascertain how tall it was, because we went right out there and measured up this pole to where that thing's head was, and it was over 9 feet tall. And I think that was up until that point, this was just a really fun and curious subject. But I remember when we measured that up and saw how tall it was, I looked over at Roger and I said, well, I'll be darned, they are real, aren't they? Because to me, unless you got a 9.5 foot tall human out there putting on a monkey suit and running around, and especially the way the thing moved, it just like glided into view there. So that's one of probably the best visual evidence that I've ever encountered with that.
Let me ask you a question or two about that, because I'm curious. You said this was kind of prairie-like land. It wasn't real wooded or anything like that.
Yeah, it's out close to El Reno, Oklahoma. And there are, it's not, I don't think you would still classify that as what they call the cross timbers. But you know what the cross timbers are.
Mm-hmm.
It's the woods right before the eastern woodlands fade into the prairie. It's right on the edge of that. It's flat terrain, but when you there's a lot of farmland, open, prairie type farmland. But when you get on like rivers and creeks or areas where there's springs, then there's still a lot of woods there.
So they would have had some place to hide and
yeah,
a habitat.
Now, that being said, my thoughts on it, trying to put two and two together here, I don't think that these creatures stay there, because it's and one reason I say that is there's not a consistency of sightings that I've received from that area. It's like you will have a period of time where you get a lot of them, and then you'll have a few years where you don't hear anything. So my view is that they're traveling along that river, and which is not far from this area. When I say not far, I mean very just a few miles, very few. And with the springs, food sources that would be there, whether deer or whatever plants that they would forage on. So just me trying to make sense of it. Still not as much cover as, say, Eastern Oklahoma or Missouri or somewhere like that, you know.
Yeah, where there's more ample, perhaps, food
Right,
sources,
right.
water source, that sort of thing. Yeah. You think they migrate then from one area to another?
In a case like that, I would say it would be necessary because just I mean any population of any kind of creatures, if they stay put in one area, you're going to find loads of evidence for them. And it would be there all the time. Like if you got herds of deer, cat, anything like that around, you're going to find tracks and stuff for them all the time. Where this is not the case, you'll have a period of time where there's sightings coming in and then not. You know, so yeah, I think they would have to be passing through.
Yeah, well, I think that's true too. It seems like that there's sometimes a migration pattern that they have, and a lot of people say they have more sightings in the spring and fall in their area. I know here in Missouri we did a film Byways of Bigfoot along the Niangua River. There's a gentleman that owns some property real close to there, and he could hear them. He hadn't seen one, but he could hear them in the spring and the fall, generally speaking. But he didn't have a lot of evidence of dead winter or in midsummer.
Okay. And two, something to consider as well is spring and fall is when more people are going to be out in the woods generally to find something.
That's a good point.
That's something to
I
take
hadn't
into
really thought about that,
consideration.
but yeah,
Yeah.
it's more and more people would be able to see them at that particular time. So have you researched all over Oklahoma, and do you get out of the state of Oklahoma to research?
Most I've done some in Arkansas, and I really like the term investigate more than I do research because really that's what I'm doing. I'm investigating um, sightings and stuff. Of late, I don't investigate that many sightings that come to me unless they really stand out. Most of what I do now is I go out in the woods by myself in places that are hot spots, if you will, and camp, and mainly just try to pay attention. Uh, but back then, especially, I did a lot of on scene investigations into sightings, but most of those were in southeast Oklahoma and
You,
generally the eastern side.
yeah. So with all the research, have you had your own sightings? Have you seen anything yourself?
That I can 100% say I'd be in the upper 90s simply because it was one of these solo camps that I love to do. It's just to me, it's therapeutic to be out in the woods by yourself and get away with everything. But I had gone to one of the camp spots I frequent down in southeast Oklahoma, and this would have been probably about 3 years ago now. And I got there just before dark. And as I'm getting stuff out of my pickup, and from where I'm at, the terrain goes down. There's a creek in the bottom, and then it goes up, and it's very heavily wooded. But I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. First, I thought that's a burnt tree stump, but when I turned to look at it, the burnt tree stump took off running into the woods. But it wasn't big, like like you heard Bigfoot and stuff. My estimate was it couldn't have been. It wasn't over 5 foot. I would say it was probably about 4.5 foot tall, but it was bipedal and it did run off, and it was kind of a grayish black in color, but it was very quick. And I didn't see anything else the rest of the evening.
So do you think it was a juvenile, maybe, since it was small?
I don't know what else it could have been, you know.
Any other
Unless
sounds, smells, anything like that while you were?
there were some not smells. No, I didn't smell anything. But after it had run off into the woods, there was some chattering from each side of the creek further upstream from me. Whether that was, I've jokingly said, well, maybe that was a juvenile and that was its parents for getting onto it for being careless and getting spotted, which who knows.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I assume you've heard the Sierra sounds.
Right.
Yeah,
It,
I mean,
it
that's
wasn't
that
wasn't really like that.
wasn't like that.
No.
But that was the scenario that Scott Nelson had with those Sierra sounds, that it was probably a mom and dad and a juvenile, and they were all talking to one another because there was such a distinction between a male voice, a female voice, and probably a youthful voice.
Okay. And this was who now?
The Sierra Sounds, Scott Nelson. On my
Scott Nelson.
channel,
Okay.
it's he was my very first interview on anything Bigfoot related, and it was an eye opener. It was a real eye opener. It's Bigfoot the language, and he analyzed the Sierra Sounds and was able to. He's a linguist, so he was able to distinguish a lot of that, and some really interesting sounds came through. At on
I've actually got the book about that, and I've interviewed Ron Moorhead on my own podcast,
Mhm.
and he's an interesting individual.
Yeah, I traveled out to North Carolina and did an interview with him as well. Yeah, he's a fantastic person to interview. Had some really interesting experiences up there in that Sierra camp.
And he's also got some very interesting theories about all this, which I got to say is kind of above my head. I don't know much about quantum physics, but one thing I told him, I said, man, whatever anybody can say about your theories, nobody can say you didn't put the effort into learning about this stuff. So, yeah,
It
he was a
is
very interesting guest. Nice fella, too.
exactly. Yeah, it is, and it does seem like the Bigfoot community does divide kind of right down the middle of the flesh and blood people and the people that see it as something a little bit more paranormal.
Divide is the right word. It's gotten, I'll just say it, it's gotten downright silly in some aspects. And really, I don't know how long you've been looking into this, but in a way, we're kind of where we were back in the early 2000s because you had some very colorful people from different. I don't know if you remember Eric Beckjord.
I know I just got in this 2.5 years ago, so a lot of
Oh,
those
okay.
names aren't gonna
Now
are not
look
gonna
up
be
some of
familiar.
the like Eric. He was a character, and you still had some of the old crew still alive. Renee DeHenden was still alive, and he certainly pulled no punches with his opinions on things. Uh, but what's different now, I think, is it's so easy for a fringe opinion to become pop culture. Like I've lost track of how many different cryptids are out there now. And I don't even try. You've got I've heard somebody use the term apers the other day, which I'd never heard that. But basically, back when I got into it, you had Jeff Meldrum, who recently passed away. Unfortunately, you had John Bindernagel, which actually got to meet him and talk to him in depth there once, and they were looking at trying to solve this mystery within their own study, right? Um, and you got primatologists, you got wildlife biologists, so they were trying to figure out, especially like Meldrum and some of them, what is the closest thing in the fossil record that might match this? And of course, they came up with, well, maybe it's a descendant of Gigantopithecus blackie. The only, and I actually talked to Bindernagel about this, and I said, here's the deal. There's nothing about the Gigantopithecus that would lead me to believe it was bipedal. Because really, what do we've got? We've got a few teeth, we've got a couple of lower jaws, and from what it resembles is a really big orangutan. So why would Gigantopithecus have left Southern Asia, where it dwelt, where all of its food sources were, to make this thousands of mile trek all the way across the icy north, the ice bridge, where none of its food sources were, into the North America, where certainly none of its food sources were. And all the while it's walking, this giant orangutan's hind feet morph from an ape's foot into something that looks like a human's foot. That part, and that's not making fun of anybody that researched that. They were looking at it, trying to make sense of it in their expertise, which I appreciate. But that part didn't make sense to me. And then you got the other sides that they're uh, interdimensional beings that come and go as they want, which I think Ron Moorhead's kind of explored that. And then you've got people trying to match it with their religious beliefs and saying that, oh, these are the descendants of the Nephilim from Genesis chapter 6. And I am theologically educated to a point, and I can tell you that is not what they are. Because if we look at the Nephilim as what it says they are in Genesis chapter 6, these were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. If you look at Greek mythology, figures like Hercules, what was Hercules the product of? He was the product of a human woman and a god, right? In uh, the old biblical text, they were the offspring of the sons of God or angelic beings and humans. But I think we're seeing basically your demigods in Greek mythology, very likely the same thing as what is referred to as Nephilim. And it goes into that, different species, this and that. So there's a lot of divisions in it. And people, instead of talking about it good naturedly, some of them get offended if you're not in their camp. And uh, it's just the way it is.
Exactly. And it's like I interview all different types of people and they have a lot of different opinions. And, I haven't seen one, so I can't, and I'm not that type of a researcher. So I really don't have too much of an opinion about what they are. What do you personally think they are?
Oh boy. Ask me again in 6 years and I may have a little bit different. But at this point, I would lean toward them being closely related to us. And one thing I use for that, and again, this may change with time, but at this point, well, for one, they got to be smart enough to know that we humans are bad news and they need to try to stay hid from us. I think that's indisputable. Why would I think they're closely related to us? Well, some of the old Native American stories from the Pacific Northwest, where a Sasquatch has kidnapped or abducted a native girl and produced a child with them. I believe it's is Seraphina Long. Is that her? Was her name the
Yeah,
young
that name sounds
girl
familiar.
back
Yeah,
about 100 years ago or so?
right.
Now that being said, I've no way to verify how true that is. If that is true, that they could produce offspring with a human, they would have to be very close to us. So, that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, and a lot of people talk about just the quality of the eyes and the facial expressions, that they're just so human looking. I've had so many people tell me that when they saw their face, they might have a gun with them and they might think they might shoot them, but then they see that face and it's just so human like.
Yeah. Now I'll tell you, I would really like to have that close of a sighting of one. I really would. I have a friend that has, down in, of course, they just moved the museum, Tanya Kordak, which I interviewed her. Do you know her?
No.
Has the Bigfoot Museum. It was in Tallahena, Oklahoma, but they just moved it to Clayton. Now she had a like literally face to face with one of these creatures on their property there in southeast Oklahoma, and she described the face and stuff, and she said it was more human.
Yeah,
So
it does seem to have some of those qualities from what people describe to me. So in your books, you wrote three separate books. They're all on this subject. Is that right?
right, the first one is a fictional account based on a monster in Choctaw folklore called the Champe. That's spelled Shampe. This was my first attempt at writing. You can see it. It's that one right there, and it gets read quite a bit. Here's one thing I've noticed: uh, not our fictional books on Amazon, people tend to read them on Kindle Unlimited, which looks good, but the author doesn't make much anything off of it. But when you've got the non-fictional books, people want those in their hand, you know. So yeah, that was my first book. And the second book I wrote is this one here, and it's called Kaimishi Bigfoot: Investigating the Oklahoma Sasquatch. And the cover, that's from a picture I took below my camp down there, actually in the same area where I sighted that smallish creature. Um, and it goes into how I got involved in this subject, my earlier investigations, and up to some of the more current ones as well. And then my last one is kind of a continuation of that one. And I just published this. I get it where you can see it here. Just a few weeks ago is when it came out. And it's called Oklahoma Bigfoot and Other Reported Mysteries, which it includes my thoughts on the Sasquatch, what they may be, what they do, some reports people have sent me, some that I've investigated, but I also include people don't just send me Bigfoot reports. Sometimes I get reports of other unexplained cryptids, if you will, or other strange phenomena, and I included a chapter with those in it as well.
When you were invited to be part of the Travel Channel, how did that come about, and what all did you do in that
Okay,
mission?
yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was when I had my website called, it was just southernbigfoot.com. And how he picked my website, I have no idea, but a gentleman from England named Bruce Burgess, he's a producer, and he does a lot of documentary films on different subjects, um, whether it's Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, UFOs, you know, such as that. And he sent me an email. This was before the social media really got going, you know, sent me an email, said he was um, wanting to make a documentary about Bigfoot sightings in Oklahoma, wanted to know if I'd be interested in it. My first thought was it was a joke, you know, but I checked it out, turned out it wasn't. So, and and you'll find this funny being close to Oklahoma. He actually asked me if I knew any Native Americans. I'd like, you know, Bruce, this is Oklahoma. It would be harder for me to find anybody that did not have, you know, native blood in them or whatever. And he's like, no, no. He said, I mean, somebody like affiliated with a tribe that, you know, and those are folklore that would be interested in doing this. And I said, like, yeah, I've got a friend I think would have fun with it. And his name was Tim Harjo, who was a friend of mine. And Tim was a big part of it. He was on a pretty good segment of it. Everyone you see interviewed on there about their sightings or whatever are people that I knew through my website and introduced to Bruce. And so basically, he flew to Oklahoma in September of that year. It's been 2001. We jumped in my truck and I took him from central Oklahoma all the way to the southeast corner, all the way to the northeast corner. And he was taking notes the whole time. And then he left, went back to England. And then in late November, he came back with a film crew. And we spent, about a week and a half, I guess, doing the filming for that.
Well,
And it was a
that
lot
had
of
to be an interesting thing to do. I mean, what did you find the filming process to be like? Was it difficult? I've heard a lot of people talk about the kind of exhausting time frames it takes to get some footage down.
No, it really wasn't, because Bruce, I tell you, he really had it so planned out when he got here. Was it tiring? Yes, just because of the pace, you know, but it was just, of course, I was a lot younger then too, you know, but it was a lot of fun. You know, he had it all planned out. We're going to do this. The first sighting that he interviewed some people was actually just not probably 5 miles from where I sit right now. There was an encounter that, well, they would have been teenagers at the time, but people I actually went to school with had a fairly close encounter with one of these creatures out in the woods, like I say, about 4 or 5 miles to the east of me right here. And when I was looking for people on that, I looked them up and I called them. I said, hey, do you remember back then? I said, were you guys serious? Were you guys making it up? They're like, no, that really happened. I said, hey, you want to be on a Travel Channel documentary? Yeah, matter of fact. Okay. So that was the first one. And then we ended up going, I think the next stop was around Antlers. And just north of Antlers is where we filmed um, most of the parts with Tim Harjo and his son Kanjat in the mountains there. And then we went down to Broken Bow to the property of a friend of mine, Lewis Stiles. Then from there, we went up all the way up to the Grand Lake area where we met with the two officers that had had the encounter. And then from there, all the way back to central Oklahoma, close to Wewoka, where Tim, and this was the last things we filmed, Tim Harjo met with Seminole tribal elder there and filmed a little bit there. And that was and I went home before that was over with because I was exhausted. And I said, do you need me for anything else? No, I said, okay, I'll see Tim Monday, so I'm going to go home and sleep. But it's funny, before I left, it was dark. This little Seminole kid comes running up to us. He said, hey, there's a white dude talking to a tree over there. And we're like, what are you talking about? But one of the cameramen, his name was Martin. And this part's in there. There's a part on this video where a guy's talking into a night vision camera. And at one point, he looks off to the side like this. When they were interviewing Tim and that tribal elder, Martin had went over and he had set one of his small cameras in the branch of a tree, and he was talking to it. This little boy had walked up and saw him and just like said, dude, there's this white dude talking to a tree over there. But when Martin turns his head and looks, that's when the little boy comes running up. So that was pretty funny.
Can imagine. What do you think about gifting? Some people take gifts and leave them, and Bigfoot takes the gifts and gives something back in return.
I don't know. I mean, if they're curious creatures like we are, I mean, if you find something bright and shiny in the woods that seems out of place, you may take it home, right? So I've never done anything like that. I've got a pretty new friend down. He's on the Arkansas side of the border, Mark Wentz, which he and I just went camping together down there in one of the hot spots I go to. He does that, and I think he has had some success with it. The only thing I've ever done would resemble that is, and this has been years ago, a good friend of mine that we do some of this investigation together, named Brian Baker. We took some apples out there and put them in the woods. They were gone the next day, but this was 20 plus years ago. And that, anything could have taken an apple. We didn't find like Bigfoot footprints around it. But as far as gifting, I don't know. As far as them taking something and leaving it, I've never experienced anything like that myself.
When we did Byways of Bigfoot, we did put out some complicated boxes that had knobs on them, turning points with lock. You could put a padlock on it or something, but it would be a little complicated to get it open. We put some various protein bars and peanut butter and things like that in several boxes and strung them around. It took about 3 months, but eventually something got into them. Something was able to get that open and get the peanut butter and the bars out and gone with it. But what took them, we don't know.
So you didn't set like cameras or anything up?
There were some cameras around generally in the vicinity of these, but no, nothing was caught. It was just the boxes were opened and the food was gone, but no, we didn't see anything on the cameras.
I tell you, I don't know how complicated that would, but I took, and I really wasn't for this purpose. Actually, my screensaver there in that area, I took a game camera back there because I wanted to see what wildlife was coming up. I don't, if it's a Sasquatch walked up there, I'd just be yay, But I'll watch this raccoon come up to it, and we set some food out there. And man, raccoons were coming up eating that. And you can see on this one I filmed, this raccoon notices that game camera, and he's over there, and he has his paws on it. Just you can see it just shaking around. And that little critter figured out how to get that thing off of that tree before it was over with. Now, what you did, if it's that complicated, I mean, I don't know. And when I say I haven't had experience with something, that's not me being critical of it in any way. I think, to me, try all these different things and let's everybody trade notes sometime, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So I know that you have done a little bit of your homework on DNA and some of the DNA research, and I just did an interview with a gentleman that just released about
Right.
research on DNA. What can you tell me about that, or what do you think of it?
I think it's great. I've met Haskell. He actually, really, okay, there's two names that really come to mind when you're talking about DNA now. It's Haskell Hart and Melba Ketchum. And I'm sure both of them know a whole lot more about DNA than I do. Um, I've met Haskell, visited with him. Very nice, obviously educated individual. Never spoken to Melba, so I have no idea. What I would love to be witness to is those two sitting at a table and comparing notes, but it doesn't look like that's in the making anytime soon now. But Haskell, his eDNA, environmental DNA, is collecting very fascinating because if any, you got a pool of water in the woods, pretty much anything that's dipped a toe in it or taking a drink out of it, there's going to be DNA in it. And he's as I always that's how I contacted you actually this morning because I was watching the interview with you and Haskell and just wanted to say, hey, thanks for having him on. That was great. Um, as far as Melba's, I've read her things as well, and I was acquainted with Scott Carpenter, who was involved in her deal as well. But like I said, I've never spoken with her, and I'm going to step out on a limb on the DNA thing. Um, from what limited knowledge I've got on it, to be able to take DNA and say this is definitely what that animal is. From what I understand, we have to have indisputable physical evidence of that particular animal in the genome or whatever database that we can say this is what it is. So, from what I'm understanding, and I've read Haskell's book, which is very interesting. I've read, the stuff that's online that's Melba's. When you're getting this, it seems like it's a process of elimination right now because we don't have a Bigfoot body somewhere that we've got that DNA, like say we do a black bear or something else. So we can definitely say, well, this is very similar to human, but it's not quite, or something like that. So, like I say, I'm so limited on my knowledge of DNA. It's that's kind of where I'm at on it.
Yeah, I'm with you on the DNA. It seems like that we have to really have something that is concrete. Yes, we can prove this is definitely DNA from a Bigfoot before we can compare other DNA to it and say, yeah, that also is Bigfoot DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a catch-22 there because we don't have that strong evidence yet. Why do you think that an actual body or some body part even hasn't been found of a Bigfoot?
Well, I you and I were talking a little bit before the vast volume of Bigfoot reports out there. My own opinion is that although Bigfoot reports are many, actual Bigfoot are relatively few. Okay. And I addressed this in one of the chapters in my new book called Hoaxes and Misidentifications. You're going to have a number of reports that are hoaxes for whatever reason. Maybe it's somebody wanting attention, maybe it's just somebody having fun. You're going to have, but the majority of reports of Bigfoot that are not Bigfoot, I think, are misidentifications. I don't think the hoaxing is as rampant. Most of the hoaxing that I'm seeing is through like AI type stuff on the internet. It's like you can't look at anything on Facebook now because it's just too easy to fake, and it's getting better and better or worse depending on how you look at it. Um, and again, going back to what do we think they are? I think they've got to be smart enough to know we're bad news. We've kind of proven that over the years. Um, but that's a very valid question. It's I can understand why a person would ask, why don't we have a body? Why don't we have more than this? If we do have one, I'm not aware of it. Um, Yet at the same time, sometimes people that are credible go out in the woods and they see one of these things, and it's indisputable, at least to them. So I don't know.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
You
Well,
gotta have an opinion.
I don't know why we haven't got a body that, for one thing, I think it's very difficult to find anything in the woods once it's been there for any length of time, and these are too far and few between maybe to actually run into that. That would be my conclusion on that one. But I think that also it's just really difficult for people to we barely see them when they're alive and moving, much less when they're deceased and maybe not moving. So it
Well,
would be really, really complicated, I think, to just run across a body.
consider this as well. And this is not me saying this is what I think. I'm just throwing it. If they're that intelligent, if they are closely related to us, maybe they don't just leave their dead out there to rot. I mean, it's a big mystery. It really is. And me personally, I'm happy we still have some unsolved mysteries out there. I hope we always do. Now, when we're talking about a body, I'm going to be very plain. I am 100% against going out there and shooting one just to have one, because I do not believe they're just an undiscovered ape. Because I think if they were just an ape, we would have found one a long time ago. Because you look at the wild, what is it when we discover, go out looking for a new species of ape or whatever, when they find out the area that they've been seen, they go in and they start studying them. We really haven't been able to do that here.
Yeah, and you would think with drones these days, if a Bigfoot is seen or spotted somewhere, or there is known Bigfoot in an area with drone capacity, you would think that there could be some existence of being able to find them well enough to be able to really hone in on where they are. And
Yeah,
we haven't really utilized that as much, I
unless
don't.
they do go into caves or such as that. So yeah, there's a lot of unanswered things. So
True. So you said that, in that last book that there were a lot of reports of things other than Bigfoot. Now, were these just cryptids, or are these kind of like paranormal things happening? What type of things? Right.
well, one is a report of a um, possible alien abduction type thing that was sent. And of course, the lately popular dogman stuff, I'll get, those things, which a good friend of mine named Brian Terrell, I don't know if you know of him.
Mhm.
He has red dirt cryptid investigations. Matter of fact, I'll let him write the forward on that because he does investigate that. Me, not so much. Um, but I think, and one's on the orb thing, which is really interesting because I use the report I put in there about the orbs as a lesson on perception. And I'll explain this. Just because what somebody said they saw is not what they saw doesn't mean they're lying. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does.
I'll put it this way.
Absolutely.
The
Hmm.
first time I talked at the conference at Honubby about three years ago, I guess, they put us the speakers up in a cabin, and it was me, Shelley Covington, Montana, and a gentleman named Pete Buffalo Head, and he's from up north central northeast Oklahoma, and he's a Ponca native. But anyway, it was after dark, and we're standing outside the cabin, we're talking, visiting, And I looked down at the edge of the woods down there in the dark, and there's these three orbs of light kind of lazily drifting along. And I said, Pete, look at that. And it'd been a dry summer, coming this first week of October. And he's like, I said, you see that? He said, yeah, I see that. And of course, I'm thinking, wow, it's been a dry summer. That is a really neat atmospheric phenomenon, probably static electricity or something. And I just start walking down there. I want to see if I can get closer to get a better look. And Pete says, don't follow those, David. And I'm like, why not? He said, those are the little people. He said, they will lead you off in the woods and get you lost. Okay, back to my deal. Was it a weird atmospheric phenomenon, or was it a manifestation of the little people, as Pete was familiar with in his own tribal folklore? Or was it neither one? But we both saw the actual same thing.
Get a
So,
lot of people seeing orbs that are
right.
Bigfoot hunting, but they're out in the woods. A lot of them see them without any evidence of Bigfoot being around. But
Oh, and there was no evidence of Bigfoot there at all. And that's the only time I've seen them.
I used to be a UFO researcher. So years ago, from the 90s on, I did a lot of UFO research. So when Bigfoot came along and people were talking about these orbs and sometimes even craft, UFO craft and things like that in general areas, you don't know if it's because they're outside more often and just see more things that are out there, or if it's, actually some correlation. Is your opinion on that?
Between UFOs and Sasquatch,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I haven't um, had any reports come to me that correlate the two. Um, Not directly, anyway. Uh, Now, if you've heard of Stan Gordon, I'm sure. He wrote extensively about, because back in the late 60s, early 70s or so, there was a large amount of Bigfoot slash UFO sightings up in Pennsylvania, so much they actually call that phenomenon the Pennsylvania effect. Um, Now, I did the closest thing kind of to that was here a few years ago. I investigated a series of Bigfoot sightings on a gentleman's property close to Antlers. And I wrote about that extensively in my first book on Bigfoot sightings. As a matter of fact, uh, Kerry Arnold, do you remember him? Of course, he's passed away. He was a friend of mine. He came up with and did a documentary on this place, and he did the best documentary on that subject I've seen yet. And I believe it's still on the website. But the guy that owned that property, he had a lot of like security cameras around his house. Um, and on one of them, it was the field out behind his house just lit up with light. And then one of the still shots of it, in the darkness above this field, you can make out the circular edge of something up there. And I'm like, he says, what does that have to do with Bigfoot? I was like, I have no idea, and probably nothing to do with that, but that's a curiosity. And I actually recommended, I said, look, Stan Gordon would be the one you'd want to talk to, and he's still active in this as far as I know.
Yeah, I think
But
so. I interviewed him a while back, and I think he is. But I've had several people that are out Bigfoot hunting, and the orbs show up, and craft shows up, and all kinds of things
yeah,
happen.
I have no idea. I mean, and here, we were talking earlier about how everybody's separated into different camps. Here's the thing: if you are honestly investigating a subject, if you're out there investigating Bigfoot, but you see something else there, you got to include it. You don't have to say that they're related to each other, but you just can't leave it out because it doesn't fit your narrative. Otherwise, you're no longer honestly investigating anything.
Well, I think that's true, and I've interviewed a few people that said the very same thing. It's like, why are we leaving out all of the light phenomena that happens around Bigfoot investigations? Sometimes people will see Bigfoot and it's like sparks coming off of the hair, and we don't know what causes that, but nonetheless, that's a phenomena that's reported occasionally.
it is. And I think it, like, again, if you're and I remember, my gosh, especially back in the early 2000s, if somebody was reporting a Bigfoot report to a fill in the blank particular organization, whatever, if it wasn't in their narrative, they would either not include it or they would leave that part out.
Right.
And that's, I'll give you an instance. One time, I'd sent some reports to different organizations, so I'm not putting anything there, but I was investigating this one and I was on a creek and I spooked a really big wild hog and that thing shot up the bank. I'm like, oh, I'm glad it was going the other way. But when it made it to their website, they didn't put it was a hog. They said it was a very large animal, which is not a lie, but I'd identified the very large animal as a wild hog. So, don't got to be careful you don't leave things out just to fit your narrative.
Yeah, I
And
think honesty, especially when a subject that has this much mystery around it and is already kind of looked down upon a lot of the time, I think it's good
right.
to keep the facts clear and straight and straightforward, no matter what they are.
Mm. Now, and if it's something I like, if you ask me about some things, if I haven't personally seen what I consider valid evidence for it, I'm not gonna say, when there's a lot of things that I haven't. People ask me, I was speaking at one conference, said, what do you think about Dog Man? I said, honestly, I don't think about it at all. you know, I mean, I've never seen anything like that. And to me, and this is where me and Brian and Brian Terrell's a very good friend of mine, kind of go back and forth. And and he'll tell you, I don't know if you've interviewed him on here or not, but he's a very, and okay, I can't hear you now.
I just said, yeah, I have interviewed
Oh,
him. Yes.
oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah, but I've told him, I was like, look, in my mind, that's not a naturally occurring biological entity. And I don't even want to think about what union would have produced that. It's probably illegal, actually. But anyway, to me, something like that would be more in the paranormal category than it would in the like take the Sasquatch. To me, that's a feasible flesh and blood, biologically reproducing entity. But you take a hair covered human type body with the canine head. Uh, to me, that's outside of that. To me, that would fall into the paranormal. Now, do I discredit the paranormal? Absolutely not. I think there are more things in heaven and earth than we have dreamt in our philosophy, as Shakespeare said. But
Many things that we don't know the answer to, but that's the
right,
mystery
right,
that keeps us going and keeps us researching and keeps us looking.
it is.
Now, people can find your books on Amazon. Is that
Yes.
right?
Or in person. I'll be speaking at Honubby at the conference there. They don't call it the Honubby Bigfoot Conference anymore. I think it's called Bigfoot on the 40. Now, I'll be speaking there the first weekend of October. That'll be on Friday and Saturday. I'll be speaking, and along with me, there'll be me, Lyle Blackburn, which he's well known, Chester Moore, Brian Hoolan, and Shane Church. Well, I hope I don't leave anybody out. Uh, Lance Hightower, and I think Troy Hudson. So they got, a line up there. So I will be there. I'll have my books and stuff there if somebody wants to get a copy in person. But yes, they are available on Amazon in ebook or paperback, either way.
And do you have a website? Can people get in touch with you through a website or anything?
I've got a YouTube channel called Bigfoot and More, and they can reach me through that. My email is bigfootandmore@yahoo.com. And if anybody wants to send me a report of Sasquatch or any other weird entity they encountered out in the woods, I'd love to read it. Like I tell people, if they would like to see a video analyzing the report made, sometimes I do that. If they don't want me to, I'd love to have it for my database.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. I know it's been a while coming to get this interview, and I'm really glad you were available today.
Yeah, it worked out. I wasn't planning on being home at this time, so it worked out. But
Well, it
thanks
was,
for inviting me on. I enjoyed it.
yeah, well, thank you so much. And I'll let you know when this comes out. And I want to thank the audience for watching. And please like, share, and subscribe.